Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's session on Citrix SD-WAN Orchestrator Essentials. My name is Lucas Araujo. I'm a lead enablement specialist here at Citrix. And today we're going to go through and talk a little bit about SD-WAN and focus primarily on Orchestrator. So traditionally, our group has worked on the readiness materials for support and a lot of our internal technical side of the house. But recently, we've inherited a lot of education, and so we're excited to work on a lot of the new courses that are going out to some of the customer-facing. So this session here really focuses on also as an intro to our new CNS 231 course, which really goes into talking about SD-WAN, focusing on the 11 version. It's a 200 level course. So if networking is not your background, the focus is mostly on configuration and administration to give you some insight into what SD-WAN is, how it works, how to basically deploy it in your environment, and showcase some of the key differentiators when it comes to the SD-WAN overlay. So kicking it off, let's talk a little bit about what software-defined WAN is. I'm not sure everyone's background, but it's important to kind of cover this and talk about SD-WAN and how we deploy it here at Citrix before kind of jumping into giving you guys insight into Orchestrator. So SD-WAN, it's kind of a new trend in the networking world. What we've seen over long periods of times is that networking is primarily switching and routing, and it's been, that for, a couple decades. And we've seen a trend where there's a lot of different challenges associated with the traditional networking sort of topologies out there, where we don't get a lot of insight into the individual applications, their performance, how do we provide fault tolerance across the WAN, and some concepts like that that really pushed networking to adopt a software-defined networking sort of methodology. And the goal is really to abstract a lot of that traffic management and monitoring that traditionally has been placed on the networking appliances, and really have I guess like a top-level view into your network, just to improve the app performance, deliver a higher quality user experience. A lot of organizations, especially today, are using, have multiple locations and rely on remote activity from their users. So that's important, as well as cloud adoption. So one of the things that's really key to understanding software-defined WAN is really when we get into talking about what, I guess, the router does across the wide area network. And traditionally, that's been divided into two segments, which we call the data plane and the control plane. So the data plane is really concerned with the way that traffic moves, the actual flow of traffic, while the control plane is really kind of like the director that is responsible for determining where packet's going to go. And with software-defined WAN, one of the things that we want to do is extract that control plane from the individual devices and leave it just basically function as a data plane. Now, when we think about traditionally what a network engineer has to do to basically manage and develop their network, often they're defining a bunch of rules or policies and having to manually distribute them or jump onto each individual appliance to be able to troubleshoot or isolate an issue. So that's often very time consuming. So extracting that control plane is really critical when we think about SD-WAN. On top of that, we have a lot of other challenges which we sort of want to overcome as we sort of transition to this new era of software-defined networking. An important key is really delivering better application performance. And we want to make sure that when we're using our apps, we do have availability from server failures or site outages. And traditionally, this has always impacted application availability. Nowadays, a lot of networks out there will have multiple WAN links in their environment. Traditionally, they'll have like an MPLS, but they might have another like backup broadband or LTE link. So with SD-WAN, we have new tools that really manage these different types of internet connections and do some sort of network aggregation. This not only is important for redundancy, but it really optimizes performance between the office branches, the data center, and now the cloud. So, well, hopped a little bit across there. One of the key things we also want to do beyond just application deployments is really make it easier for administrators to shape bandwidth, prioritize traffic. This is really important for some applications that businesses really need to leverage and use, and they're really mission critical. So we can do a lot of things through QoS or traffic prioritization, where we're saying, hey, this software is non-essential, this one is, and allowing admins to really fine-tune their network. This allows for additional security, making sure that data theft doesn't happen, and we're improving the actual traffic as it goes through. That is often very critical. So we discussed the control plane and really focusing on giving admins power to distribute the new rules and policies. With SD-WAN out there, you can do this in a matter of seconds, no matter what scale is out there, just because you're looking at it from that top-end view. So if an error occurs in your network, you can troubleshoot it from that central management location rather than jumping on individual routers or having to push and change a bunch of different scripts or commands, which is really helpful. Citrix is one of the few SD-WAN vendors with a really robust cloud solution. We have a lot of, branch integration with Azure. We can offer automated network deployment using Microsoft Azure Virtual WAN. We have our management solution that we're going to talk about today in SD-WAN Orchestrator, hosted in Citrix Cloud, as well as what we call Citrix Cloud Direct, which is a SaaS gateway service. And one of the last challenges that we've seen as a trend across the network is the growing cost when it comes to WAN links. Usually these are the biggest expense that sort of exists out there on the network. Traditionally, the gold standard has always been MPLS, and MPLS, for a lot of reasons, is worth the price, but it is very expensive. And usually, it's a fixed monthly expense that usually has about a 3-year commitment with the service provider. And what's going on is we're seeing WAN traffic grow about 15% year over year. And this is really due to the way people are using apps now, being hosted in the cloud, and it being much more feature rich. So one of the goals with SD-WAN is to really lower those costs. So this is a high-level visual overview on all the different things that we can do here at Citrix, and we'll navigate this shortly going through with SD-WAN. So sort of the traditional use case when we think about Citrix SD-WAN is what we call WAN virtualization. And really the goal is we have multiple links. One of them might be a backup link that we traditionally just will use in a down site, but we're not leveraging that all the time. Maybe we only have the MPLS network up. One of the things we want to do is virtualize all those different links and make it appear as one. There's a lot of different things we can do, enforcing like bulk or non-essential traffic across a much slower WAN link. In this use case, we also have redundancy across the different WAN. If we have a critical issue or one of the WAN links go down, our virtual WAN will still be good and it will still handle traffic. Depending on the site that you do have, often each WAN, SD-WAN deployment will have a data center, which will traditionally deploy what we call our master control node, which basically is the overseer of that network. But we often have several branch sites. Now, at the branch sites, it can be very expensive if we have 4 or 5 users and we have to buy some very expensive networking equipment. And one of the things we can do is at the branch sites, SD-WAN can be deployed as that edge device and replace that edge router and consolidate a lot of the networking footprint that often we would need to make sure that our security policy, our networking policy is all in unity at each site, right? So that's one of the many capabilities that we can do at a traditional level with SD-WAN. On top of that, we're seeing a lot of use today in today's cloud, right? A lot of apps and environments are hybrid and they are being migrated to the cloud. And at the moment, what a lot of infrastructure are doing is they're using something like Azure Express Route or AWS Direct Connect so that it appears like these private networks hosted in the cloud are part of their network and they don't have to actually backhaul traffic through the data center. Now, the challenge with this is that's a very costly expense. If we have an SD-WAN environment, we can spin up another SD-WAN that will basically serve as an extension of your SD-WAN environment, and that cloud network will basically in turn be another branch site. On top of this, we do have some additional methods of connectivity to the cloud. One of them is Azure Virtual WAN Hub, which basically allows us to directly connect our branch sites to cloud resources without utilizing some public internet links. We also have integration with Office 365, and the goal with this is to really optimize some of the SaaS applications that are out there, making them low latency, especially something like O365 can often be business critical depending on what the end user is using it for. We do have our deep packet inspection engine on the SD-WAN that will classify the traffic as O365 and will direct the user to the closest front door for O365, and this will basically result in a lower latency connection. In addition to this, we have integration with some popular secure web gateway services that are out there. We have focused integration with Palo Alto using IPsec tunnels. We also can use Zscaler. And then in addition to this, we have our own Citrix Cloud Services, which have additional use cases. One of the ones that we're going to focus on is SD-WAN Orchestrator today, which can really be used for multi-tenant deployment management. We also have our zero-touch deployment service, which works in connection with Orchestrator. And this is really useful for branch sites that don't have IT staff on hand and you want to deploy SD-WAN. All you basically have to do is power it on, connect it to the network, and the Orchestrator is basically responsible for pushing down the latest software package as well as the configuration. We do have Cloud Direct Service, which basically provides almost like a backbone to some of the cloud-based apps that you want across the virtual WAN. All right. So now that we have an understanding about what SD-WAN is, how we can leverage it, and some different use cases here at Citrix, let's talk in specific about Orchestrator. So Orchestrator basically came out of a concept of almost two birds with one stone sort of situation. We really didn't have a cloud management offering to be consumed as a service, which was the ask that we had for in the field. And we also didn't have a multi-tenant solution. So Orchestrator basically came out of this need for us to leverage, to host this for partners that really wanted to leverage and manage multiple customers all through a single portal. And in the process, we have offloaded the responsibility of a lot of the configuration and software management that used to be delegated to the on-prem master control node, which we briefly talked about, and pushed that all to the cloud in SD-WAN Orchestrator. So with some of that management, we do have additional tools that will really facilitate and simplify SD-WAN deployment. If some of you do have a background with SD-WAN and you've gone through the configuration editor, I've done it, a bunch of times, and to me, it still feels very foreign. And unless you know what you're doing, you often will run into errors and audit messages, and that's just because of the way that the configuration editor is sort of laid out. The guided workflows that we have with Orchestrator are very much night and day for getting a site up and running. In addition to that, you really have a lot of additional features like site profiles, where if you have multiple things in your environment that is similar, maybe because you're basically using the same ISP or your WAN link speed is the same, you can basically cut out a lot of steps in the site creation. We have site cloning capabilities. You can batch sites. You can upload configuration, download configuration, touch it all up in JSON. You have zero-touch deployment, which is huge, as we mentioned before. When it comes to our software and license management, we do have centralized licensing through Orchestrator. So we offload all that responsibility, as well as not having to download multiple versions of, the latest version of SD-WAN or something like that. We can just host that on the Orchestrator and push that out to each individual device. When it comes to troubleshooting, it also is a really nice solution. Since we do have that sort of bird's eye view into everything that's happening across the network, we can easily see through the dashboard if one of our sites has a critical error. We can see the status of the virtual path. We have alert logs, and we will also pull all that information in the parallel communication that happens between Orchestrator and SD-WAN to basically make sure that if we need to dig into something a little more specific at each individual site, we don't have to jump into a bunch of different GUIs. We can do all that directly from Orchestrator. Now, I did mention a little bit about the previous sort of rendition of how we would deploy SD-WAN in an environment, and often we would be leveraging a tool later after getting it up and running called SD-WAN Center. SD-WAN Center is only on-prem. Orchestrator has parity with SD-WAN Center, and we do have additional features that we've rolled out, and the long-term solution will be utilizing Orchestrator. I believe SD-WAN Center will be going end of life by the end of this year. So that's something to consider if you're in between the two solutions. When we take a look at it from a deployment perspective, as I said before, with SD-WAN Center, you're going to be doing everything through the MCN, which is, I would say, the primary control node on your SD-WAN deployment. You're going to be doing all the configuration through their own configuration editor. We're going to be using change management to push out and provision multiple branch sites. Once we have established the virtual path between the two SD-WAN devices, at that point, we would introduce SD-WAN Center as the management solution to gather logs and to do some of the troubleshooting and licensing features that we would need to really optimize our infrastructure. However, with Orchestrator, you start directly from the Orchestrator service in Citrix Cloud. So as for a lot of customers that, for a lot of partners that have multiple customers, once you're already set up your orchestrator, you would actually send invites to each of these individual customers, invite them in, and you can choose basically what they get access to, what they can see even on their customer side. So it's really neat, and you can offload some responsibilities to your customers, or even if you don't have that solution, maybe like a junior admin, for some monitoring or some reporting. After you've handled that whole onboarding process, which we'll talk about shortly, you would add the sites, do the configuration both on the MCN and the branch site. For any additional sites where we can leverage zero-touch deployment, that would probably be what we want to do. And from there, we just kind of sit back and actually go ahead and look at the traffic as it's going across the different sites. So, making sure that the virtual path is communicating properly, looking at different alerts as they come in, and, handle all the continued management through SD-WAN Orchestrator. All right. So we are going to go into talking more about Orchestrator. Let me just see if we do have Orchestrator up and running. So this is an actual site that I spun up earlier today. I'll kind of hop back and forth between this live demo and some of what we're going to be talking about today, just so that you guys can get the look and feel of the actual service here. As you see here, I do have two sites that I've actually deployed. They are on the east and the west coast, and one is our traditional MCN, which is our master control node, and then we have a branch site in San Jose. One of the things that you'll see immediately with this bird's eye view is you will see insight into the actual status of your virtual path. So this is in green in this case. We do have an orange setting, which is basically non-critical alerts, and then red would mean that the virtual path is actually down between the two different sites. We also have a gray setting, which is if you're in the process of testing and deploying an additional site, but you haven't activated that site, it would appear as gray. And this is really nice for different geo zones where you would actually want to see it on a worldwide setting, not just here in the United States. So even though we do see this is up, we get immediate insight into a couple of alerts that exist. We have, I've tailored a little bit to show just some use cases here. So here we see that the overlay has been up for 100% of the time, while the underlay has been up for 60% of the time. So this is a common scenario where if we were only relying on one network link, and in terms of our traditional network, that would be what we call the underlay. The overlay is what we call with the SD-WAN on top of it. We would be only up for 60% of the time. So there's some additional troubleshooting we would probably have to do here at this network to see why this is going up and down. We have insight into here our top applications and our top sites, which we can sort of drill into. So this is the dashboard. We'll be talking more about this as we sort of go through today's session here. All right. So as we said before, SD-WAN Orchestrator, it's a replacement for SD-WAN Center. It makes deployment a fast reality for a lot of partners and enterprises who really have a DOI approach. We do leverage Orchestrator from within Citrix Cloud. It's one of the service tiles that you can activate if you're familiar with the Citrix Cloud platform. It does use role-based controls. So as we mentioned before, you could have somebody that's more junior on the team, only sees the dashboard, or maybe the alerting, and basically monitor the network. While you'll have someone more senior be able to troubleshoot or jump in if some of the environment is down. We have options for multi-tenancy. So if you're a provider that has multiple customers, this is a really optimal solution for you. We do have, as we said, the rapid deployment. We can set up branches pretty quickly with zero-touch appliance setup. Excuse me. We have cloud integration, not only on AWS, Azure, but also leveraging that direct connect that we talked about, and as well as Azure Virtual WAN. We have integration with Palo Alto, Zscaler, in their services that they host, as well as integration with Office 365 and G Suite. One of the things that's really important is that when we talk about Orchestrator and its bird's eye view into your environment, if we're managing everything from a single portal, we need to make sure that we do have connectivity to each of the devices that we have successfully deployed, especially if we're offloading the responsibility of configuration and management from the MCN to the SD-WAN Orchestrator. So when deploying this the first time, you might need to engage your security group to be able to make sure there's IP connectivity. In terms of the actual ports that need to be open between SD-WAN to SD-WAN, we are utilizing UDP 4980, which is our traditional port and protocol socket that we basically use for the virtual WAN. But for Orchestrator, we're just using TCP 443. All right. So this is the workflow that we've discussed shortly when we were talking about the differences between a configuration with SD-WAN Orchestrator versus the on-prem solution. When you set it up, let me see if I can show this real quickly. You would actually go through and hit a new site. Now, we have different solutions within the configuration network config home. So you do have the ability to set up backups, download your configuration, upload your configuration. And if you have multiple SD-WANs that you're testing and deploying, this is really useful to see, what works, what doesn't work, and you could actually have a whole test site or test environment built into this as well, almost as a separate customer. So when I spun this up, all I did was I browsed and uploaded, and I already had a JSON file already set up to upload and to configure our SD-WANs. The only thing specifically I had to set up in this environment was the serial number, which is a unique identifier on each SD-WAN. But if you want to add a new site, you can just come over here. You can add some information really quickly, and we can put Miami, Florida, and I'll just step through this really briefly. So one of the things you'll see is that the information that we've asked for is everything that's specific to the SD-WAN itself. If you've gone through the configuration editor in the past, if you have a lot of background with SD-WAN, a lot of these details are the same. So we do have to identify certain roles that we will have. What's our bandwidth? What sort of model we use? When we sort of go to the other sort of settings here, you can kind of hop around. We will need to identify the serial number. This is the unique identifier, which when you log into the SD-WAN or you have CLI access, you can get that pretty quickly. We'll have to add in all of our interface information. SD-WAN is a layer 1 through 3 device, so it's important that we make sure that all of this works, not only on the routing side of the house, but the interface side of the house as well. Any sort of WAN link that will participate in the virtual WAN path should be added when we sort of build it out here. And then lastly, any sort of static routes that we need to forward traffic to that isn't necessarily destined for the SD-WAN well, we need to actually identify this as well. And what's really cool is as you sort of build this out, you'll see this the actual network mapping of the interface and the IP information be associated with it here. So if we go back to all of our sites and we sort of just jump into DC, you'll see something like this here. So we can easily see which interface is connected to our LAN side, different interfaces that are participating into the virtual LAN. We have an MPLS and 2 broadband connections. Each of them have different speeds. So when we do our network aggregation, we should have a total of about 35 megabits. We can check those out on some of the reports here. All right. So hopping back here to our configuration, we will go through the step 3 was the adding sites, which I did sort of walk through very quickly. Zero-touch deployment will happen at additional sites that you want to access that. And then after the virtual path is set up, we can use our dashboard, which I briefly showed, and additional management features to take care of our SD-WAN environment. One of the things that we always want to make sure, as we talked about, we do need IP connectivity. Now, this works in parallel, and it's like a communication process that happens not only with the SD-WAN orchestrator, but the SD-WAN device itself pushing information to orchestrator. We do have a lot of reporting features. We can, verify our device inventory. We can get details on, what are the versions of code that our SD-WAN environment's running on, the IPs, serial numbers. But all of that has to happen through a polling, which happens every minute. Our data is going to be updated based on everything that's happening in parallel in the conversation between SD-WAN and orchestrator. So important that IP connectivity does continue to happen across both SD-WAN to the orchestrator. So just make sure that we do have communication, if there's some sort of firewall or NATing involved, to make sure all the right ports are open. Now, we didn't go too deep into some of the different deployment modes that SD-WAN does offer. One of the big ones that we do offer is both having a single region and a multi-region deployment. So for infrastructures where we want to segment our different SD-WAN devices, really it's a sprawling environment, we can leverage something like multi-region deployment, where traditionally the MCN would just have what we call RCNs, which are remote control nodes at each different region, which handles the individual communication to different SD-WAN environments. When we leverage Orchestrator, the key thing to know is that Orchestrator will require IP connectivity to each node. Previously, the SD-WAN only needed to interact with, the MTN only needed to interact with the other RCNs, which in turn interacted with the different client nodes. If we are leveraging multi-region deployment, Orchestrator does need to talk to each SD-WAN in your environment. So in terms of the Orchestrator service itself, there's a lot of things sort of happening between Orchestrator and each of the individual devices. And the primary way where we're identifying, even though we do need IP connectivity to each of our devices, the way that we're identifying which SD-WAN exists at each site is through the serial number. So each of these serial numbers do have to be unique. We do have seen some cases on the VPX side of things where if you're doing something like snapshots, you might have duplicate serial numbers, so that's something to consider. You'll have to actually roll out individual VPXs and import them and go through the whole process. So that's something to consider. We do have something like a new version get rolled out or a feature enhancement that we want to deploy across our network, we can use Orchestrator to push out the security package to each of our devices, and it's going to identify which package and which configuration to push out based on the serial number. So if we have a lot of different sites or a lot of different tenants, one of the things that we do want to make sure is that we associate the correct serial number with the appropriate config when we're building out that site in Orchestrator. If a device is shipped maybe to an incorrect site and we push down the wrong package, that's really going to cause a lot of issues with that individual network, just because the SD-WAN is really involved with the networking. So it's something to make sure and double check when deploying SD-WAN. Just verify that the serial number does match with what we've configured in Orchestrator. All right. We've talked about the data exchange that does happen between Orchestrator and the devices. In terms of Orchestrator to the individual devices, it's really primarily responsible on pushing configuration and software packages. So if we make any changes in our site information, we add a new WAN link, we add a new interface, we want IP the interface, we want to handle all that through the Orchestrator itself. If we want to roll out a new software package, we can do that, or anything with licensing is going to be Orchestrator to the device itself. We will get into some of the batching that we can do. We can do some API calls as well from the Orchestrator to the device. Now, in parallel, the device at the same time will be sending some call home information, and this is utilized in our reporting that we'll sort of drive through in a second. It will give us insight into the network health and usage and performance information, which is important for us in terms of validating and fine-tuning our network after we've successfully deployed it. Now, when it comes to Orchestrator, when we rolled this out, we only had a POP in the US. Now we do have a POP in EU, and we do have some planned POP expansions as well across different geos. And this is primarily to reduce any sort of latency concerns as we're managing our SD-WAN devices. All right. So we did talk about this pretty briefly. One of the key features that Orchestrator does provide is centralized licensing. At the moment, you can, if you do have Citrix Cloud and you jump into the login where you see all the different service tiles available, you can request a trial of Orchestrator today. If you haven't done it before, it's going to give you about a 45-day trial license. And if you want to utilize this for further testing or migrating to Orchestrator for production, you can order that as well. So it's a great solution to kind of test drive Orchestrator if it's something you are interested in. When we comes to Orchestrator and the centralized licensing, everything is handled through the administration portal on Citrix Cloud. So we can add in additional licenses to any of our SD-WAN products or additional Citrix products that we've traditionally used in Citrix Cloud. Now, when we license our appliances, they are restricted to what we provide on our licensing side. And the key caveat is that we do need a continuous communication with our licensing. Otherwise, after a period of downtime, we will lose capabilities and go into a grace licensing period of 10 megabytes per second in terms of our bandwidth restriction. And this will also happen if you're test driving this past the 45-day trial life. All right. So when it comes to Citrix Cloud itself, there's different ways that you can implement this depending on if you're a partner or if you're a customer or what your overall goal is achieving when it comes to multi-tenancy. So we do have this tiered architecture, and really understanding it is important because depending on what you set up and if you're the partner or maybe you're the customer, you're going to get a whole different interface or service tile depending on what you see when you log into the portal. So traditionally, when we set up Orchestrator, it was limited only to our managed service providers, and they have to actually sign up through this partner program. It's still a way for you to get access to a Citrix Cloud partner account. And if you are a partner, this is the way that you want to set up your account by going through and making sure on the service tile, you click Resell SD-WAN. Now, once you set this up, you would go through Citrix Cloud to the My Customers, and then you would select the option to invite or add. You're going to provide the admin details to get them onboarded onto Citrix Cloud. Now, after they've gone ahead and finished the invite process, you will see them added as a customer in your dashboard. And it's at that point that you can add the SD-WAN Orchestrator service as something that they would want to leverage in their environment. Through our identity and access management portal, which basically hosts, all of our different security implementations, authentication, that's the way that you would basically add the admin to be able to log in and see that service tile and have that information populate. So this is very similar to anything that if you've worked already with Citrix Cloud, that we handle the security side of the things. All right, so let's jump into talking about a little bit about the deployment prereqs, and then we'll do some more live demonstration of what we see a little bit behind the scenes on Orchestrator. So if you are setting this up for the first time, the thing that we really need to do is to either use the, to get an IP, to go through the CLI and probably assign an IP so that it does have network connectivity. And then the other thing is after you verify that, jump into the GUI itself and grab the serial number. The two caveats when it comes to communication, as we said before, is making sure we do have connectivity from the SD-WAN to Orchestrator and the SD-WAN across the virtual path. So to Orchestrator, it's going to be TCP 443. Across the virtual path, it's going to be UDP 4980, which is our traditional socket. When it comes to getting a customer up and running, as we said, we would add a new customer in the provider dashboard. Afterwards, you go through the whole site configuration. Now, when we build out a site, it doesn't automatically get pushed out to each of our SD-WANs, and we do that on purpose. It goes through what we call a deployment tracker, and this will happen on-prem or in the Orchestrator because of the fact that SD-WAN is a really network-sensitive device. We want to verify that this won't affect our infrastructure. There's no errors in our configuration or whatnot. So we'll use the deployment tracker to verify that the configuration is right. We'll stage it. If it appears to be working properly, we can then deploy it. We want to make sure that our devices do have network connectivity and that our Orchestrator does have appropriate serial information. And at that point, after we've gone through the deployment tracker, it will push down the software package, licensing information, and configuration. And then at that point, as we showed before, we can verify that the virtual path has been established. So if we hop back over to our SD-WAN itself, and we go back to our sites, I'll show you what that looks like here. So we do see that we both have both of our sites on, they're green, we have unique serial numbers, we have our IP information, and this is where, after we verified that we've added both of these sites and we do have cloud connectivity, we want to come over to our deployment tracker. This is the test site we created and we're sort of demoing. That's fine, we can blow that away. But when we make a change to our configuration, we will go through the verify stage and activate cycle. We also have insight into our deployment history, how many different times that we've pushed out configuration to both our devices, any sort of failure information, which is really important for change control as you are pushing these out to each site here. Now, zero-touch deployment works basically in the same way, except that in terms of where it will get all of its configuration is through the department, the stage, I guess, which is step number 2. When we basically turn it on and plug it in, if DHCP is on the network, that SD-WAN device will get an IP lease, and it will at that point attempt to call home with the SD-WAN Orchestrator service. As long as the serial matches, we'll see that has cloud online, and at that point we can work through the zero-touch workflow, which is basically the same thing that we've shown. The only difference is that the software and license distribution will happen through the zero-touch deployment service, which is kind of a hidden service on Citrix Cloud, which happens during that stage process in the deployment tracker. One of the things that it is important to note is because we are using additional service for this, is that we do need to make sure that our appliance has access to the following domain names that we see here in the upper right-hand corner, all over port 443. And these are the different APIs that we will be leveraging for zero-touch deployment. So in addition to that, we do have some additional prereqs when it comes to our LTE capable devices. We will be using zero touch, and we do need an activated SIM card to communicate with the cloud services. So we do have a couple appliances that just run on LTE, or you could use that in conjunction with other WAN links. This is really important for maybe some sites that are really small or remote, or a couple, remote-only users that will want to leverage this. So we step through the deployment tracker. It does go through 4 stages. Verify, we'll do a sanity check on configuration, identify any sort of errors. Stage, we'll push out the configuration, the software, and the licensing, see how that interaction happens. This is also where zero-touch deployment will be working as well. And then activate is basically where we're pressing this on button and we're flipping all of the devices to a working mode, and we'll see how the performance happens. We do have a track which gives us insight into the status of each of those devices and sites. So once we've gone ahead and set this up for the first time, really all we will have to do to make sure our environment's up and running is use our dashboard. There's a lot of fine-tuning behind the scenes we can do, which I'll kind of briefly go through really quickly in the demo environment before taking some further questions. But this dashboard is really nice because it does give that bird's eye view into the organization's SD-WAN overlay network. It helps us quickly see and identify health and usage across all the sites. We can hover over each individual site and see, if the health, the bandwidth tier, IP information. So it is a really nice management solution, as well as the color coding, which we talked about earlier. If it is in red, we do have a critical alert, and one of our overlay virtual paths is actually down. If it's orange, it is we might have a member of our underlay down, but all of our overlay virtual path is up, which means that we do have connectivity. And green means that all of our virtual paths up and all of our underlay is working as well. And then gray just means that it basically hasn't been deployed yet, and it might be under configuration. So it's a quick bird's eye view to really see all of that information. Now we are running short a little on time here. There's a lot to kind of cover, but we'll just go through this very briefly. So outside of maybe like analyzing this dashboard, some of the things we could do is, once we come over here and see that, hey, our health is green, we can go into the alerts and see why, something like that. So in my case, I basically forced a connection to be down, and this resulted in a red alert, basically said that the virtual path is dead. So in our environment, we can quickly see, okay, we have 2 high alerts, we have 2 medium alerts, and 43 low alerts. We could come over here and clear this if we want. The alert system is more of a monitoring solution, so if you do clear these, the alerts will still be located in our logs, which I'll show you how to access in a second. So we come over here, we delete these alerts, and we can delete all of our high alerts. And now that's clear here. And we can come over here and see that, okay, we rebooted our appliances. Well, that explains why we would have those high alerts. And then we would come over here to our low alerts. We can get some insight into what's going on. So we see that some devices are good. It's gone from bad to good. They notified each other. Usually these low alerts are just something that you want to keep an eye on. They're not sort of something to be concerned about. We do have usage. So if we were using applications across the SD-WAN overlay, it's going to be captured here in Orchestrator. So you can get some insight into what sort of protocols are being leveraged, the volume of traffic, the bandwidth being utilized. Now this is extremely useful for QoS or any of our bandwidth prioritization. That is really important as well. We do have inventory, so we can get quick insight into the actual device itself. We can drill into the details and see some of this information, what software version it's on, if it's deployed, if it's undeployed. We can get insight into our virtual path and our underlay. So in this case, I did actually turn off some of our underlay network to showcase this, the fact that some of it's only up 60% of the time. While at this case, we still have a complete solution across our virtual. So even though we aren't using all of our capability, to the end user, they won't see any sort of down environment, which is really important when it comes to SD-WAN. We have additional metrics here when it comes to QoS, historical stats, some real-time views, Cloud Direct, and O365. We sort of navigated the network home, so you guys see some of that. There's additional fine-tuning, which is more specific on what you are trying to do with SD-WAN, which we do cover more on the CNS 231 course. So this is some of the bandwidth optimizations we can do. So we can say, okay, we want 100% of our virtual path to be utilized for, depending on what sort of link you're using. We have some of our routing information here. So we can apply some route costs. We can do some stuff with QoS on this side, where we set, depending on the protocol, a specific sort of QoS setting. We have security settings that we can do, so we can apply encryption between the SD-WAN to Orchestrator, and this is all communicating over AES 128. You can select a stronger setting here, as well as some additional firewall solutions. And lastly, when it comes to troubleshooting, we have our logging, which is really important. Any sort of audit log and commands will be listed here as well. Anytime you touch a configuration or push it out, you'll want to look at the logs. If you are troubleshooting, you can jump onto each site and actually pull down individual logs if you are doing further troubleshooting. If you're working with support, this is extremely useful without having to jump to each site. And lastly, we can run our diagnostics. So we're usually divided into 4 tools. Ping, which is just testing layer 3 connectivity. Traceroute will identify the path that we're taking. Packet capture will give us some insight into additional things that is going on in that path. and the traffic that we are trying to accomplish across the overlay. You can select individual, once you actually choose a site, you can select individual interfaces. And then lastly, you have a bandwidth test. So if you have an ISP that says, hey, we're offering you 50 megs, and you actually want to see what they're really giving you, you can do something like that with a bandwidth test. So it's a lot of different cool networking troubleshooting solutions, all sort of wrapped up within Orchestrator. All right, so we have a couple of minutes here. Let's take a look at some of the questions that we do have, and then we'll get to our last slide here. All right, so Jeff asked, are there any plans to allow MCN config environments over to Orchestrator? Have many clients expanding their environments to upgrade the hardware and want to move on to Orchestrator? So I can't give you a definitive answer, Jeff, because I know it's something that's under NDA. But as I showed you before, we do have some solutions where we can basically import a JSON file that you can sort of tailor and doctor. And there, as we go end of life with SD-WAN Center, there is some solutions that is being worked on for that migration. So hopefully shortly you'll get some more clarity on that. And is there a plan for premium features of WAN op coming to Orchestrator? That's a great question. At the moment, right now, we are focusing on SE, Standard Edition. With WAN op, we are in a place where I believe with SD-WAN Center, it's also going to go end of life at the end of the year. Now, the premium edition will retain the features of WAN op, but at the same time, I haven't heard too much insight on how that's going to be leveraged with Orchestrator. So we can keep in touch if you want, and if I hear anything on the roadmap, I'll let you know about that. All right. So Simon asked, is it possible to migrate an existing SD-WAN deployment using MCN management? I was a bit cagey with that when I responded right now to Jeff. So my understanding is there's a proposed solution in the pipeline. I don't have all the insight and the details on that just because it is something that our engineering team is working on. We do have some intermediate solutions, but what I've seen, at least right now, if you want to spin this up for the first time, you probably want to build it from scratch at the moment. So hopefully that will change in the future, but at the moment, it won't. All right. We do have some additional questions. I'll be responding to those via email. I'll get your information and try to get back to you guys. I just wanted to highlight, I guess, our last slide that we do have here. So there's a lot I wanted to cover today, but we just didn't have time. Almost everything that I talked about today is something that is covered in our CNS 231 course. So if you're interested in knowing more about Citrix SD-WAN, I recommend you guys go ahead and register for a training course. It is, in terms of, it had the first session this last week. We do have all new labs. Everything's updated to the 11.0 code, and it is a 3-day course. So at the moment, I believe everything is being hosted virtually, but you can basically make some time and work with the CCI instructor, depending on what time works best for you. I know that there's courses happening all across the geo, so you might find a better solution for you if depending on your region. It does include all the conversations we talked about with Orchestrator and more, additional conversations around considerations when thinking about each individual branch site, some more, I guess, administration-focused topics on management, monitoring, reporting, troubleshooting. And then the big gotcha here, if you're interested, is that if you do sit it between now and the end of June, you don't actually have to take the certification exam. You'll automatically be certified in Citrix SD-WAN. So make sure to scan the QR code that you see here or visit the bit.ly link and reserve your seat in your class today. So with that, thank you guys so much for attending today's session. My name is Lucas, and I'm sure that you guys will get this recording, so feel free to reach out to me if you guys do have further questions on SD-WAN. And I appreciate your time and checking out today's session on SD-WAN Orchestrator.